Top of the morning to you. It is July 11, 2025. Urban Pulse Global Podcast, where the city speaks loudest. Start your Friday mornings plugged into the heartbeat of the world. Urban Pulse Global is your 8 a.m. power surge, curating today's top stories from the New York Times, the Caribbean via CARICOM, and Africa via Africa News. From Brooklyn to Bridgetown to Bamako, we bring a streetwise spin to global headlines, connecting urban voices across continents. One podcast, three continents, all the pulse. Introducing Urban Pulse Global Podcast, where the cities speak loudest, broadcasting every Friday at 8 a.m. Today, it's July 11, 2025. In a world overflowing with headlines, one podcast dares to cut through the noise and deliver the real rhythm of the globe, one urban heartbeat at a time. Introducing the Urban Pulse Global Podcast, a dynamic weekly news show airing every Friday morning at 8 a.m., where city streets, cultural beats, and global voices collide. Where the city speaks loudest isn't just a tagline, it's our truth. Urban Pulse Global dives into the day's top stories, pulled straight from the New York Times, Caribbean News via CARICOM, and continental developments via Africa News. From the bustling boroughs of New York to the vibrant communities of Kingston, Accra, and beyond, we bring you a streetwise, unfiltered view of the news that shape our lives. Hosted by a sharp and spirited voice rooted in real-world experience, Urban Pulse Global simply reports the news. It does not interpret it, but connects it and pulses it with rhythm and relevance. Our aim? To keep you informed and highlight the global ties that bind our urban worlds together. Whether you're on your morning commute, sipping coffee, or powering through your workday, Urban Pulse Global is the perfect way to plug in, catch up, and stay aware globally. We'll now begin with the New York Times today's paper. All the news that's fit to print, the New York Times. And in today's weather forecast, today will be cloudy. Today cloudy, humid, and afternoon thunderstorm, high 85. And tonight cloudy, humid, low 73. Tomorrow sunny, humid, a stray thunderstorm, high 85. The weather map can be found on page B12. Friday, July 11, 2025, the New York Times. And the main picture featured today on the New York Times, the caption reads, Scott and Connie Towery took in the destruction on Wednesday at the River Inn in Texas, where Scott is general manager. So the first story we will cover the title is Fatal Overdose Helped Expose a Drug Empire. Prosecutors' Fight Led to Her Hometown. And this story is by Benjamin Weiser. Where's your emergency? The 911 operator asked. Roadway Inn on Woodstock Avenue in Rutland. The caller replied, her voice barely under control. My boyfriend lay down for a nap and he's not breathing. The operator began explaining how to perform CPR, asking whether the boyfriend could be lowered to the floor. The caller, Ginger Parker, was immediately distracted. Their 18-month-old daughter had crawled on top of the still body. Honey, get off of him. Please, Miss Parker pleaded, explaining to the operator that the toddler, just wanted to help. The man she was trying to save that evening in August 2012 was David Blanchard III, who worked the night shift at Rutland Plywood in the small Vermont city. The 28-year-old with a neat goatee, dark hair, and kind face lay on his back in a dingy motel room strewn with clothes, a sheet, children's toys, and books, and a pink rubber duck. This story continues on page A17, and there's a photo at the bottom, but I think this is a different story, right? Different story. So the next story is out of the U.S. Attorney's Office from the SDNY. Flow, a potent brain of heroin, ravaged a Bronx neighborhood and a small city in Vermont. All right. So the next story featured on the New York Times. The headline reads, "Desperation, Heroism, and Survival. One night on the Guadalupe River." And this story is by Meredith and John. Hunt, Texas. The screams were coming from outside, through the dark and the din of the thunderstorm. People along the overflowing Guadalupe River were desperate, crying for their lives. The rain had been coming down hard into the grim early hours of July 4, but it was the lightning and thunder that kept people awake. The electric sky lit up the landscape like a strobe light, providing glimpses of what was happening and adding a surreal effect to the night. In a flash, the manager of an inn saw the river where he had never imagined it could reach. A family saw into the house next door, where furniture floated in the living room. What is happening? Room to room, house to house, minds tried to make sense of the water rising all around. A woman in bed saw animals run past her window, not realizing that they were logs and debris being carried by a river that had climbed 30 feet in the dark. A woman told neighbors that she awoke in bed to discover her two dogs swimming toward her. People awoke to strangers banging on their doors. It was the middle of the night, the water was rising, and somewhere out there, people were screaming. As all this played out around Merrimead Drive and the River Inn Resort in Texas country, other scenes of horror unfolded up and down the river in the early morning of July 4. At Camp Mystic, an overnight camp for girls about a mile downstream, hundreds were in their beds and bunks. The youngest campers slept closest to the water. At least 27 of the campers and counselors died in the flood. Other places were epicenters of heartbreak too, like the RV park and campground with waterfront cabins. Pulled through sites for trailers and across a small bridge on a low-lying island, people staying in tents. Many would die that night. That story continues on page A12. And in other stories on the front page of the New York Times today, polygraphs used to gauge loyalty to FBI's leader. Senior ranks tested. Some questions are said to seek any negative talk about Patel. This story is by Adam Goldman. Typically, the FBI has turned to polygraph tests to sniff out employees who might have betrayed their country or shown they cannot be trusted with secrets. Since Kash Patel took office as the director of the FBI, the Bureau has significantly stepped up the use of the lie detector test, at times subjecting personnel to a question as specific as whether they have cast aspersions on Mr. Patel himself. In interviews and polygraph tests, the FBI has asked senior employees whether they have said anything negative about Mr. Patel. According to two people with knowledge of the questions others familiar with similar accounts. In one instance, in one instance, officials were forced to take a polygraph as the agency sought to determine who disclosed to the news media that Mr. Patel had demanded a service weapon, an unusual request given that he is not an agent. The number of officials asked to take a polygraph is in the dozens. Several people familiar with the matter said, though it is unclear how many have specifically been asked about Mr. Patel. The use of the polygraph and the nature of the questioning are part of the FBI's broader crackdown on news leaks, reflecting, to a degree, Mr. Patel's acute awareness of how he is publicly portrayed. The moves former bureau officials say are politically charged and highly inappropriate, underscoring what they describe as an alarming quest for fealty at the FBI, where there is little tolerance for dissent. And that story continues on page A15. More on the White House. Whistleblower. Justice Department lawyers are forced to choose between the president's agenda and their ethical duties. That's on page A15. And subpoenas. The administration is seeking private data on gender-related care for minors. That story, you can find it on page A16. Testing limits. President Trump signaled he would wield tariffs to protect his political allies. That story can be found on page A10. And other stories making the New York Times today. Your rental car gets dinged. Your rental car gets dinged. You will too, thanks to AI. And that story is by Gabe Castro Root. The next time you rent a car that's your rental car gets dinged. You will too, thanks to AI. Okay. The next time you rent a car, that ding on the door might not slip under the radar. Powerful new AI-driven tools are helping Hertz and other countries catch every little scratch, and puzzled renters are being asked to pay up. Hertz, one of the world's largest car rental companies, debuted the technology last fall at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, and it's now in use at 5 other U.S. airports, said Emily Spencer, a Hertz spokeswoman. Developed by a company called UVI, the scanning system works by capturing thousands of high-resolution images from all angles as a vehicle passes through a rental lot's gates at pickup and return. AI then compares those images and flags any discrepancies. The system automatically creates and sends damage reports, Miss Spencer said. An employee reviews the report only if a customer flags an issue after receiving the bill. She added that fewer than 3% of vehicles scanned by the AI system show any billable damage. Still, unexpected charges for damage that's barely visible to the naked eye are leaving renters wondering what's going on. This story continues on page A16. Let's see what else is making the front page. And there's another photo on the front page. Okay, let's just see what we've covered already. Okay, great. There's another photo on the front page, and the caption reads, "Deadly strike near a Gaza aid clinic. Children were among the 18 people killed by Israel's attack in Deir al-Balah on Thursday." That story is on page A6. And in another story making the news, making the front page, and this is the final major featured story on the front page of the New York Times for today. Mamdani open to keeping on leader of police. This story is by Emma and Maria. Zohran Mamdani, the front runner to be the next mayor of New York, and Jessica Tisk, the city's police commissioner, might not seem like natural allies. He is a democratic socialist who has questioned whether billionaires should exist. She is a billionaire heiress who has called for stricter criminal justice laws. But if Mr. Mamdani wins November's general election, both appear open to working together, a political partnership being pushed by influential business leaders and some of Mr. Mamdani's more powerful Democratic allies. Mr. Mamdani, a state assemblyman who decisively won the Democratic primary last month, has said he would consider keeping Commissioner Tisk and has praised her on the campaign trail and in private for improving public safety and running the police department more responsibly amid the tumult that has typified Mayor Eric Adams' tenure. And that story continues on page A21. Now let's see what's happening in what are the headlines making the national news. And the national news can be found on pages A11 to 21. ICE faces pressure to unmask. Elected officials in liberal states are trying to bar immigration officers from hiding their faces in public. That story can be found on page A14. Science cuts in Trump country. The NIH has terminated hundreds of grants to young researchers from places that supported the president. That story can be found on page A20. And in international news, which can be found on pages A4 to 10, weaning off antidepressants. Warnings about withdrawal from the drugs have rippled through society in recent years. A new study claims they are overblown, and that story can be found on page A10. Pondering sanctions on Russia. European leaders' flattery has led President Trump to consider what they want for Ukraine. News analysis can be found on page A8. In the obituaries, which can be found on pages B10 to 11, Ireland's King of Concerts, Henry Mount Charles, saved his manor, Slane Castle, by turning it into a rock and roll destination. He was 74. That story, you can find it on page B10. In business news, which can be found on pages B1 through 5, Besant auditions for the Fed. The Treasury Secretary is breaking with tradition in publicly assailing the central bank's policies as President Trump looks for its next leader. That story is on page B1. NVIDIA worth $4 trillion. The AI chip maker reached the landmark before Apple and Microsoft after its stock ended the day trading just above $164 a share. And that story is on page B1. Student loan interest to restart. It will kick back in on August 1 for people in the Save Repayment program whose payments have been on hold since last summer. That story, you can find it on page B4. And in the weekend news, you can find those on pages C1 through 8. A Pottery Nerd's Inspiration. A Jonathan Adler exhibition offers a provocative lesson on humor and irreverence in the fields of ceramics. That story, you can find it on page C1. Big operas fill a tiny theater. A Des Moines company squeezes works usually done in front of thousands into a startlingly intimate space. That story is on page C1. And finally, in sports, sports news can be found on pages B6 through 9. On grass, the return reigns. A big serve is important at Wimbledon, but the ability to get the ball back in play can make the difference. That story is on page E6. Astro Rookie, a quick study. Cam Smith played only 32 games in the minor leagues before making Houston's roster out of spring training, page B7. And finally, in the opinion piece, Ross Do That, and the opinion stories or features can be found on pages A22 to 23. And this particular story, you can find it on page A23. And these are the stories making the New York Times front page today. We'll now go over to CARICOM to see what's happening in the Caribbean. So here are the news headlines for CARICOM. Special thanks to CARICOM.org. These are the headlines for the Caribbean. So this was published on July 10, 2025. Heads of government honor memory of Caribbean journalist Ricky Singh. Chairman of CARICOM, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Honest, Prime Minister of Jamaica, on Tuesday, 8 July, paid tribute to esteemed Caribbean journalist Ricky Singh, who died on July 5th in Barbados. Allow me to take a moment to honor the memory of Ricky Singh, the esteemed Guyana-born journalist whose fearless, incisive reporting shaped Caribbean discourse for over 6 decades. The story continues on CARICOM.org. On July 10, another story printed, Barbados, Jamaica removed from EU list of high-risk jurisdictions. Barbados and Jamaica are among countries that have been removed from the European Union's list of high-risk jurisdictions in the fight against international financial crimes. The European Parliament on Wednesday delisted the 2 CARICOM member states and several other countries. The European Commission had updated its list of jurisdictions last month. That story continues on CARICOM.org. On July 10, 2025, the following story was also published. Guyana partners with Bloomberg Grain to boost regional food hub exports. In a landmark move to accelerate Guyana's regional leadership in food security and agribusiness development, the government of Guyana on Wednesday signed a memorandum of understanding with Bloomberg Grain, a renowned US-based agricultural company, to market and brand the regional food hub currently under construction at Yarro Cabra along the Sois-Dijk-Linden Highway. That story also continues on CARICOM.org. Another story making the headlines on July 10, 2025, Caribbean fisheries ministers set new policy directions at 19th CRFM Council meeting. Fish trade, fisheries-related crimes, and a new environmental and social safeguard policy were among key matters on the agenda of the Ministerial Council of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, CRFM, which convened its 19th regular meeting virtually on Friday, July 4, 2025. That story also continues on CARICOM.org. And making the headlines on July 9, 2025, CARICOM SG says the Bahamas' creativity, innovation key to its success. CARICOM Secretariat, Greater Georgetown, Guyana. As the Bahamas celebrates its 52nd anniversary of independence on July 10, Caribbean Community CARICOM Secretary General Dr. Carla Barnett highlighted the diligence, solidarity, creativity, and innovation of the Bahamian people as key elements of the nation's success. And that story continues on CARICOM.org. The next story being featured on July 9, 2025, CARICOM urged to tackle misinformation and strengthen regional justice framework. Caribbean Community CARICOM Secretariat, Turkey and Greater Bridgetown, Guyana. Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados has made an urgent call for the Caribbean Community CARICOM to confront two mounting threats to the region's existence: the spread of fake news and the persistent challenge of citizen insecurity. That story also continues on CARICOM.org, making the headlines July 8, 2025. If ever there was a time for If ever there was a time for regional solidarity, it is absolutely now, Prime Minister Mottley tells CARICOM Heads Conference. Outgoing chair of the Caribbean Community CARICOM, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, closed out her 6-month tenure with a rallying cry for regional solidarity and action in the face of global uncertainty. That story continues on CARICOM.org. And making the headlines July 7, 2025, think strategically, focus on values that unite us, CARICOM chair. Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica and chair of the Caribbean Community CARICOM, has challenged the region to think strategically and focus on the values of unity in the current global environment. As small states, we are vulnerable not just to global economic shocks and natural hazards, but to being marginalized. And that story continues on CARICOM.org. Another story making the headlines July 7, 2025. CARICOM urged to recommit to core goals of prosperity, security, and well-being for all member states. Together, we have nurtured a strong Caribbean identity that transcends borders, that is admired globally, and to which others aspire. As we begin our deliberations for the 49th meeting of the conference, I encourage of us to retain our focus on the purpose of our partnership, which is the prosperity, security, and well-being of all the people of our region. That story continues on CARICOM.org. And the final story making the headline on July 7, message of condolence from the Caribbean community, passing of Ricky Singh. The Caribbean Community CARICOM extends condolences to the loved ones and colleagues of Ricky Singh, a Caribbean son of the soil and a journalist par excellence, who passed away July 5, 2025 in Barbados. And that story continues at CARICOM.org. We will now go on to the headlines, or the news making the headlines in Africa. And here are the headlines making the news in Africa. Top stories: Trump's comments on Bokai's English met with mixed reactions. Peace talks between DRC and M23 rebels moving in the right direction. In Cameroon, Paul Biya's candidacy divides his party. Angola hosts U.S. Africa Summit amid calls to revive trade. One moment. Bridging the legal gap in Africa's digital boom, Business Africa. Cyber Africa Forum highlights Benin's bold digital resilience. AI drones lead breakthrough against malaria in Africa. Yes, and Angola hosts US Africa Summit amid calls to revive trade ties. In Mali, bill granting head of Mali's junta, General Assimi Goita, 5 more years in power. Mourning begins in Texas as over 170 remain missing from flash floods. Ghana, dancehall superstar Shatta Wale urges young people to back President Mahama. South Africa, SMEs under pressure as business confidence hits 4-year low in South Africa. And in the editor's choice, bill granting head of Mali's junta, General Assimi Goita, 5 more years. Record-breaking heat in Morocco spurs demand for air conditioning. Angelique Kidjo makes history as first Black African artist on Hollywood. From flood to famine, rainfall chaos fuels Africa's drought crisis. And in the news, from Egypt, Financial Corporation, Egypt and China signed key trade agreements. Egypt and China entered into 3 financial cooperation agreements on Thursday. That was posted 10 minutes ago. Posted 27 minutes ago, UN warns millions will die by 2029 if new funding for HIV programs isn't found. 2 hours ago, Central African Republic's major rebel groups to disarm, dissolve. Trial of DRC's former Justice Minister Constant Mutamba postponed for 2 weeks. That was posted 8 hours ago. Okay, so those are the stories making the headlines on africanews.com. And just in on africanews.com, Financial Corporation, Egypt and China signed key trade agreements. UN warns millions will die by 2029 if new funding for HIV programs isn't found. Central Africa Republic's major rebel groups to disarm, dissolve. And those are the stories making the headlines on africanews.com. Thank you for staying with us. Tune in every Friday at 8 a.m. Stay informed, stay connected, stay in the pulse. Urban Pulse Global Podcast, where the city speaks loudest. Please subscribe to Global Urban Media on YouTube and podcast.allegedly.blog. The sources for our headlines today are the New York Times, CARICOM.org, and africanews.com. Have a great day. Goodbye.